Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. You get a solo episode today. So, I've actually gotten quite a bit of feedback recently that some of my long term followers miss the solo episodes. So, for those of you that weren't around, before I rebranded the podcast, it was just a therapy podcast. It wasn't specifically a marriage and parenting podcast. And it was really just me for the most part. Every now and then I had a friend, a friend of mine that's a therapist on with me, but for the most part, it was just me. And then I rebranded it. I started having guests every week. And so I've had a lot of people tell me that they miss the solo. So my goal is to mix it in. I don't know if it's going to be every other or every maybe couple that I'm going to do solo, but I'm still going to keep the guests because I think those are really fun. And I love having people on here to talk with me. So today's episode is actually it's a topic that some of you picked. So several months ago, I used to have a Facebook group that I did a lot of Facebook Lives in and different trainings. And I used to post a little poll with, I think I usually did like 3 topic choices, and you guys would vote on which ones you wanted. So I don't have the Facebook group anymore. So I decided to work in the poll because I don't always know what I want to talk about. So I figured I would just pick topics from like a chat GPT search that I did and throw them up and see what you guys wanted. So the one that was picked for today is navigating difficult conversations with kids. And I have a special plan for this one. I'm actually going to do a 2-parter. So today I'm going to do it by myself, and I'm going to kind of talk to you about the behind the scenes part as a parent and as a professional. And then I'm going to have part 2 with my son. So my 12-year-old is going to join in, and he's going to talk with me about the kid aspect of it and how to kind of get some feedback from a kid about what it's like for parents to have hard conversations. Maybe he'll give us some advice. So I was going to have him split the episode with me today, but I think I'm just going to do a solo, and then I'll just do a separate one with him. So, because once he and I get talking, we get talking. So for those of you that don't know, we do Facebook videos together, him and I. We just do random thoughts. Some of them are 5 minutes long. Some of them have been 15 minutes long. We just kind of turn the camera on and see where it goes. He loves doing it. I love doing it. And so this is going to be his first time, I think, doing an actual episode for the podcast. So it'll be fun. Okay, so let's jump into our topic. So navigating difficult conversations with kids. So this one is interesting because it's not just about the conversation piece and the words that come out of your mouth with your kid. There's so much background to it because there are a lot of reasons why it's hard to have conversations with kids. And a lot of that doesn't even have to do with the kid, right? So as parents, we have our own history with life and experiences, our own childhoods or things that we've been through that can make certain conversations with our kids a little bit more difficult. We might have our own emotions about a specific topic. And so trying to talk to our kids about it might be difficult for us because we're still trying to figure out how we feel about it, or maybe we're just emotional and it's hard to talk about it in the way that we would want to as parents. And so there's a lot that can go into it. There are some parents that are just rock stars and they can talk about anything and it's never really a big deal and they're just great with their words. And then there are other parents that are so uncomfortable having personal conversations or serious conversations with their kids. Or they don't even know how, right? Like it's not even that they are uncomfortable, it's that they just don't know what to say. So why is it even important to talk about this? As parents, we are the reason that our kids learn to interact with the world primarily, right? They go to school and they learn other things, but we are the primary people that introduce them to the world, and we give them experiences, we take them places, we do things with them, we teach them our beliefs and our values and all kinds of stuff. But we also help them navigate this world, right? We teach them to deal with the good and the bad in the world outside of our home or inside of our home. We explain things to them that might be in the news, or that things that maybe a neighbor has gone through or said, or something maybe they've experienced out at school and they come home and they have questions. Like, we ultimately are that home base where we help our kids understand and work through the things in life. But with that, there comes a lot of responsibility for us, right? Like, we have to make sure that to the best of our ability, we do this right. And that's the whole thing of parenting, right? We do so much, and we, as parents, we joke around like kids didn't come with a manual, and we, just winging it. And we don't really know what we're doing. And even if you have multiple children, your kids are most likely different from each other, and you're having to really figure it out for every kid and change your approach or modify your approach. So we're constantly having to figure out how to help our kids through the things that they're going through. And sometimes they might hear something, come to us with questions, and it's the most random time. You're not prepared for it. You're not expecting it. And you're just like deer in the headlights, like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to answer this question. And so we wing it. Sometimes we'll just pull an answer out of thin air, and other times we need a minute to think about it. So that is kind of what we're going to get into, is what are the kinds of conversations that we're really talking about, and then what are some different approaches to having hard conversations. So there are the things that happen in life that we expect, like they learn that maybe something they believed in doesn't exist anymore, right? Some kind of, fairy tale something, Santa, whatever, that doesn't exist. And now we're having to have that conversation. Or they hear something at school that is confusing, and they come and they ask you about it. Or they ask you a question about sex, or what does this word mean? And it might be a bad word, inappropriate word, or just a complicated thing to explain to a child. They may hear something on the news, then they want to know the history of why, well, when did this happen? How did this happen? And you're like, I don't know all the answers to that, right? So there are those things that come in life, right? There's normal things. And then there are things that aren't necessarily what we expect will happen, like the death of a close friend, of a relative. Yes, we might expect at some point to have to explain to them about grandparents, something like that. But when it's someone like a child that died, a neighbor, someone at school they heard about, like those are things that we really try to protect and hope to protect our children from, that they won't experience those kinds of losses. It could be an illness to your, one of the parents or a family member. It could be divorce or separation. It could be loss of financial stability, loss of a home. It could be some kind of devastating weather situation that, leads to something that's taken away in the family. So there are a lot of things that we can prepare for, and there are a lot of things that we don't know to prepare for. And then there are things that we know at some point is coming, but again, it comes kind of premature. I know for us, there were a lot of conversations with our son, Tristan, that we thought we had more time before we would get to that. School, being around kids that were either older or had older siblings and were joking around or saying things that were maybe more sexual or more inappropriate, and then having a kid that comes home and is like, what does this mean? And I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to talk to you about this yet. Like, we should have a couple more years before we even have to think about having this conversation. And so we have had, personally, my husband and I have had a lot of those, like, oh my God, wow, okay, I guess we're having this conversation, things that we just didn't anticipate. And you can attribute that to all kinds of things, other kids' exposure to the internet, social media, older siblings, all kinds of things that then have been said around our kid. And it just happens, right? So there have been a lot of times where I was able to put it off. My husband and I were both able to be like, you're a little young for that. We'll have that conversation later. And at first it worked. And then it got to the point where we just couldn't get away with it anymore. He was like, why? I want to know now. And it was this kind of crossroads of, do we put it off and risk him seeking the answer somewhere else? Like if he has a Chromebook for school issued Chromebook. What if he tries to Google it? Well, then that's going to be a disaster. Or if he asks another kid about it and he gets a very, very wrong, misleading explanation. And also just curiosity can go wrong, right? You want to know what something is and you find a wrong way to get it. So there were lots of things where we had to decide that even though we didn't feel like he was ready for that conversation, really, in a lot of ways, we weren't ready for him to be ready, right? Like we didn't want that to be the thing that we were all going to now be open up to or to have in our world. But it had to happen. We didn't pick it. It just happened and we had to figure out how to go with it. And so there were certain conversations that we had where we did just wing it and we felt comfortable enough just going with it and being like, okay, well, I'll tell you what it is now. And then there were other things that we very clearly had to say, look, I want to find the right way to explain this to you. I haven't had to explain this to a kid before. Give me a day or two. Let me look into it and let me think about the best way. Let me talk to your dad. Let me talk to your mom. Let's figure out the best way to have this conversation. And then, but we would always come back. We would, when he was younger, it was easy to hope something would be forgotten. But the older he got, we just weren't going to be able to get away with it. So we would kind of take a minute. And most of the time, we just needed a minute to gather ourselves and be like, okay, the shock has passed of him asking me about this awful word or concept. And now I have pulled myself together where I can go in and have this conversation. And then there were other times where we had to Google it. Like we had to look it up and be like, okay, what's the best way to discuss X, Y, and Z with a 9-year-old, 8-year-old, whatever. And it wasn't always like perfect, but it would give us enough idea to kind of get our own ideas flowing. And then before we knew it, we kind of had this consolidated plan. But there were certain conversations that my husband and I would have together with our son. There were conversations that we were comfortable, like you got this one or you've got this one. And we would do it separately. And then the other person would either just not need to follow up, or there are certain situations where the other person needed to follow up and go and be like, hey, you talked to mom about this. Do you have any more questions? And that way we were both involved, even if we weren't both present, but he knew that we both knew that this topic was now open for discussion, and we could, there was no secret, there was no discomfort with either one of us. And if he had a question that came up, he could ask either one of us. So our plan, it really came naturally, was to just be a united front. So if my husband happened to have an unexpected conversation with Tristan, then he would let me know, like, hey, FYI, Tristan asked this. And we talked about it, and this is what I explained, and this is how I said it. So then I would know. And either I would just be like, oh, good job. Or I'd be like, ooh, you know what, maybe I should follow up and see if he has any questions from, a different perspective. Or really I'm sure there are situations where we would have handled it differently, but really for the most part, we are on the same page enough. And if we weren't, just because we'd never really crossed that point before, then we would touch base. Hey, how do we want to explain this? What do we want to explain? And there are certain things where I think at some points happened to both of us where the other person would fill, like my husband would fill me in about a conversation they had, and I'd be like, oh my God, you said that? Like, oh my God, okay, how did that go? I didn't expect you to say that. Or, wow, how did he take that? Like, that seems like something a little bit too far along for him. But he's like, no, we just kind of went there and he was fine. And I explained it, and vice versa. There have been things I've said and my husband's like, what? Why'd you say that? But at the time, it was the right thing to say, and it ended up being fine. But when you're in the moment, when you're the one having the conversation, sometimes you just have to, you follow the track of the conversation, depending on the questions that are being asked, follow-ups, paying attention to body language, right? So if I'm explaining something and if my son is presenting some kind of nonverbal cue that's communicating confusion, well, I need to ask an open-ended question. Hey, did that make sense? How do you, tell me what you understood so I make sure that I explained it right. Or if there's sometimes it'll be I think I'm explaining something that he doesn't know, but he's heard something. So I'll follow up and be like, you look like you have something to say. Like, you look like you have a question. So you just kind of have to wing it. And of course, just like with anything as parents, you'll have moments where you're like, I did not do that well. Like that was a totally messed up approach and I didn't mean for it to go that way. So then you follow up. Hey, when I explained that to you, I don't feel like I did a great job. Here's what I give it some more thought. I looked it up. Let me try to explain it to you again. So there's really kind of the big takeaway is you're going to potentially mess up, but it's okay because we use the relationship and the comfort of the relationship to have these difficult conversations. And these conversations are important because it builds trust. It builds comfort with the parent because You could send your kid to the teacher next door that teaches, science, biology, whatever, and have that teacher have the sex talk with your kid. Okay, great. They might get a very a good explanation that would answer a lot of questions. But your kid still needs to have that conversation with you, because by doing that, they're establishing a new level of trust that we can talk about these things that are kind of uncomfortable, that are a little bit embarrassing, maybe a lot embarrassing, but it's okay. We're okay. I'm okay as mom. I'm not uncomfortable. If you're uncomfortable, that's totally fine. I'm totally comfortable having that conversation with you. Even if I'm not, I am not going to communicate to my kid that I'm uncomfortable, because then that kid is going to remember at some point that, oh, this makes mom uncomfortable, so I don't know if I should ask her this. No, you are never going to make me uncomfortable, but if I don't know the answer to a question, I will find a good answer. And if I don't feel like I can do it, because here's the thing, you might have a topic that really does make you uncomfortable. What if it's a question about something sexual, but you have sexual abuse trauma from childhood or from recent, and something happened and you are triggered by this and it's really difficult for you to have this conversation? Well, that's important to take into account, right? You can still connect with your kid and have that trust building, but maybe be very careful with what parts of that conversation you have, because it's really difficult for you. So a couple of things you can do. You can get some support for yourself and say, hey, I want to have this conversation with you, kiddo, but I need some time to get to where I know how to explain it. It's a very important conversation to have and I don't want to mess it up. And in that time, you reach out, you get to a therapist or someone that can help you, and you need to start working on whatever that is for you. And if you have to delegate it temporarily to a spouse, to a really close friend, to another trusted adult for your child, that's fine. But you do want to get to a point where you work on that enough where you can come back and have some version. It doesn't have to be the full version, but some version of that conversation with your kid, because your kid needs to know that you can be approached, that you can be trusted, that they can come to you with these things. And so it's okay to have something difficult, but there's a difference between I'm uncomfortable versus I am having a very strong emotional reaction to this conversation and I need to work through it. So it's up to you to figure out what makes you comfortable or uncomfortable versus triggered. But if it's just uncomfortable, then that's where you might need to read an article, read a book, chat GPT, ask a friend, hey, how did you handle this conversation with your kid? And just, prepare, just like you would for anything else. If you're going to help your kid with anything that you're not good at, you're going to seek support or resources somewhere. So that's just something that you need to have in your back pocket as kind of a thing to go to, a tool. I'm going to go figure out how to do this because I want to do it well. And again, if you need a minute, you figure out with your kid, can you delay it and go get what you need, or do you need to find someone that can fill it in? Because let's say you're like, okay, the thing this kid just asked me, I cannot delay this. There's some serious misunderstanding about this topic and this is going to get him in trouble, right? If he doesn't get this straightened out, he might be so confused, he might make a bad decision. Okay, I can't handle this conversation. I've got to find my stand-in. Who's my safe person that's going to come in and do this for me? And in the meantime, I'm going to figure out how I can get more comfortable with these conversations. So that's always important to remember. Take care of yourself, but also remember there is a lot of benefit to building that trust and having that connection with your kid. So now let's say if it's something that's really ongoing personal for you and really difficult, like let's say you as the parent has lost a parent, so your child's grandparent just passed away today, you just got the call and you are having to figure out how do you break this news to your kid. I can't tell you the exact way to do it because every situation is different, every relationship is different, but what I can tell you is that it's going to be difficult. There's nothing you can do to fully protect. Well, you can't. You can't protect your kid from experiencing sadness, shock, grief, those kinds of things. It's going to happen. But, with everything, there are better ways than others, right? You don't want to just spring it and be like, well, grandma just died and I don't know what. No, like delicate, have a delicate approach. You sit down, you find a space where your kid is not in the chaos of school in the parking lot, right? Like you're going to do this maybe in the safety of your home, in a safe space. Maybe you bring your kiddos, again, depending on age, right? Like if there's a favorite stuffed animal, a favorite blanket, if you, have some nice music, whatever you need to do that calms your kid. But at the end of the day, sometimes you can't do any of that. And you're just seeking quiet and you're seeking eye to eye. And then you're just honest, right? Honesty is the best approach. Kids know when we're not being honest. They're very intuitive, some more than others, but for the most part, kids know when we're lying to them. And I think as parents, we want to protect our children. It's natural to protect our kids from all kinds of hurt and sadness, but it's also really important to be genuine. And if you need to cry when you are sharing a sad piece of news, then that's what you need to do. And that's okay. It's okay for your kid to see you cry. Now, if you are a kind of, you're, aside from this very specific difficult situation, if you are the kind of person that has a lot of emotional dysregulation and you're very emotionally chaotic and you cry and you scream and you yell, that's not what I'm talking about. Like, I would love for you to work on that and for you to be able to manage some of your own behavioral or emotional struggles, because you really shouldn't be in a position where you rely on your kid for your emotional support or you confide in your kid for some more adult personal things. But when we're talking about a difficult situation, like, hey, someone's sick, someone died, something happened, we're going through something, that's okay to cry and to be very genuine and vulnerable, but you do your best to control it, right? You don't want to be, and this is so hard to say because sometimes it's just so raw and heavy that you can't control it, but that's where you try to have someone else maybe there that can support you. If it's a spouse, if it's a close friend or relative, that if they can be there during that time, then if you can't be clear and strong the way that you want to be, whatever that looks like for you, then there's someone that can step in and help, right? Someone who can support you. It might be the neighbor that your kid is comfortable with. And you say, hey, look, I've got to break this really hard news to my kid. Can you just come and just be here with us? Great. That's fantastic. Because now you just have support and you have backup. Because if you fall apart and your kid is trying to understand what's happening, then this other adult that's strong and safe will be able to help regulate the situation as much as possible until you collect yourself or until you're able to just be where you want to be. So as far as, again, like, we try to pull it together for our kids, but at the end of the day, like I said, hard stuff is just hard stuff, right? There isn't anything we can do to shield kids from hurt in life. We just do our best to manage it and present it, give them news or share hardship in a way that is most, as good as you can do it. Now, if we're talking about something that is maybe not earth shattering for you in the sense of like you didn't just find out the news. Like, what if you and your spouse decided, we're going to move, we're uprooting our kid, and it's going to be a really hard conversation for this kid. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to go in 100% focused on your kid and what their struggles are going to be, right? You might be really excited about this move, and this might be the most amazing thing that you've just, because now you get to pursue this career or you get to whatever. Or you might be really devastated, right? But what you're going to do is you're going to go in and you're not going to be focused on your own emotions because you can't make this about you. You're going to go in and you're going to say, hey, kiddo, we've made a decision as a family, and there are parts of this that are going to be really hard, and there are parts of this that are going to be good. The good stuff might not be right now; it might be a little later, but we've made the decision that our family is going to be moving. We're going to be moving to a different home or a different state or whatever. And then you just, oh my God, why? Right? You got to give them space to express, and then what you're doing is you are collaborating with your kid through their hardcore emotions, but you are pushing it forward, right? Slowly. We're not forcing them to be okay. We're not getting mad at them for their reaction. We're going to take into consideration and be prepared and kind of anticipate that it's going to be a dumpster fire. They're going to be emotional. They're going to be upset. They might be mad. They might say things that are hurtful, but this isn't personal. It's not anger long-term really towards me. I'm just going to be the punching bag for a little bit because I'm the one either inflicting this or I'm just the bad news bearer and the one telling them that this thing is happening, right? It could be that best friend is moving and I'm just the one breaking the news, right? So I'm going to go into that very prepared to have a very upset child. And I'm going to give them time to express what they need to express, and I'm going to try my best to kind of control it. It's kind of like bumpers on a bowling alley, right? Like, I'm going to make sure we're going straight, and there's only one way that we need to go in this, but I am going to put up these little bumpers so that you don't go off into the gutter and lose total control, right? So I will let you have your anger, I will let you have your sadness, but I'm going to keep trying to move us forward. Now, that might mean that I give you the initial news and you run into your room and you slam the door and you don't want to talk to me for a little bit. And then I'm just going to have to let you take a minute. And then after you calm down for a little bit, I'm going to come in there and I'm going to be like, hey, I know this is really hard. Let's talk about this. This is why. This is what happened. Here's what we've decided to do. Here's how much I know it's going to suck. And you are going to be so mad at us, and that's okay. Or, and again, I can't tell you exactly because I don't know the circumstances of these kinds of examples, but you have to put on a strong face where you don't ignore what they feel. You know, you don't want to just focus on, oh my God, but you have so many friends and we're going to, you know, so-and-so lives there and we'll reconnect. Okay, that's fine. We can point that out, but we're not ignoring the sadness and the grief. We've got to give them time. Anyone, like, I would be so annoyed if I was going through something hard and all you wanted to do was try to remind me of all the good things that are going to come. I'd be like, okay, shut up. Like, give me a minute to just be sad. I'm allowed to be sad. And kids are the same. We can reinforce, and I do this with my kid all the time. If he has to do something or something happens that's, quote, unfair or whatever, and he's upset, I'm like, yeah, man, that sucks. I'm so sorry. All I want to do is get to the part where we're okay. And he could be reacting to something ridiculous, like he was working on a game and he lost and he's just so upset. And what I want to say is, dude, it's just a game, let it go. But instead I'm like, yeah, man, that sucks. Sucks. You worked really hard on that. I'm really sorry that that happened. And I just let him throw his little fit. And then when he gets it out of his system, then it's like, man, you know, I guess I'm glad you're okay. Like, keep trying. Let's go. You know, it happens. Let's keep moving forward. Whatever I have to say to move us forward, or he'll just get it out of his system and he moves forward. But I think a lot of the times adults, you know, we're uncomfortable with our kids being upset, but they're just little humans and everyone needs to be allowed to be upset. You know, now if they're hurting themselves or throwing things around, well, now we have to address a behavior that's not so great. But as far as the emotions and the anger and the hurt and the sadness, we're just going to let that play out, you know? So our goal is to prepare ourselves that whenever we're having a hard conversation, we're going to be met with hard emotions. And that's okay, you know? Sometimes we're going to feel like crap because we're the ones that are making a decision or doing something that's really bringing this hurt on. What if you're having to tell your kid that you and your spouse decided to get a separation or a divorce, right? Yeah, you are in, you know, you can look at them and be like, we're doing this to our kid, or if we're moving, we're causing this to our kid. But life is filled with hard stuff and good stuff. It's just part of life, right? So when we're navigating those conversations, our goal is not to prevent our kid from experiencing hardship. It's to be the strength for our child that they need. It's to be consistent. It's to be stable. It's to be kind and compassionate, and recognizing first and foremost that they are going to have an emotional reaction, and there's nothing we can do to prevent that. Nothing. In fact, if you tell your kid you're getting a divorce or you're moving and they have very calm reaction, I would actually be more skeptical of that. And I'd be like, ooh, your kid is probably compartmentalizing and like stuffing down a very an emotion that needs to be expressed. So I would have more concern over that than a kid that cries and yells and screams at you because you're moving or you're getting a divorce or whatever. And even something that it ultimately is really good can just still come as a shock. You know, after the kid calms down and they think it through, they hear what you say, they may be like, okay, this isn't so bad. But human nature is to experience surprise and shock and not always be so, you know, classy about it. We overreact or we very appropriately react. So having, you know, self-regulating ourselves, taking care of ourselves before we go into a conversation as best as possible is super important. And then being able to, of course, use age-appropriate language, right? So if I have a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, whatever, a 4-year-old and a 10-year-old, and we're having a conversation about moving, well, I'm probably not going to have that conversation with them in the same room, right? I probably want to have it separately and use language that's appropriate or a place that's appropriate. I may be able to take the 10-year-old out for a drive and talk about it. And with the 3-year-old or 4-year-old, I may not even explain it. And, I may just be like, guess what, we're moving, like depends on your kid. It depends on what they need to know and how they need to know it. So always, always take into consideration who you're talking to, how they are as a kid. You could have a 12-year-old who has some kind of developmental delay. And so you're going to have to be very careful with how you present it because they hear differently, they learn differently, whatever. And so take into, know your audience, know who you're talking to. And then also if you're doing this with a spouse or a significant other, be a united front. When you have to have some kind of changing, like life-changing conversation, like we're moving, we're getting a divorce, someone died, to the best of your ability, if you can have it with the other parent, that would be very helpful because then it just creates more of a secure, it's just safer for the kid. Like they feel safe, they feel comfortable, they feel like I don't know, their world has a little bit of normalcy because the two parents that they trust are there. Even if you're separated and divorced or divorced from the other parent, but there's a really difficult conversation to be had, like someone died, bring in their resource, bring in whoever your kid feels really comfortable with as far as another safe adult, because you might not have the best relationship with your kid. What if you're going through a phase where your kid's 14, 15 is super, super mad at you, and so anything you say is just going to be evil? Then bring in another trusted person that they have maybe a good relationship with, and that just supports the kid, it supports you. But ultimately, there is no perfect way to say all the things to kids, but there are better ways. And so, a lot of the times it really does come back to us and us controlling or managing our own emotions around situations. If we're feeling uncomfortable, it's because we're experiencing our own emotional reaction to whatever the situation is. If it's an uncomfortable topic or if it's our own grief, our own loss, just notice it. You may not be able to do anything to really get rid of it, but at the very least, take a minute to acknowledge, like, hey, this is uncomfortable for me because I'm also not happy with this decision. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to do my best not to show my bias one way or another to this moving decision or whatever. What if you are the parent that doesn't want to move and the other parent's super excited to move, and this is a decision that you came to because of finances. You just can't afford the house you live in, you have to move, right? But one person is super excited about it and the other isn't, or you're both so unhappy. You do want to be careful not to be super expressive about your own unhappiness and sadness, because then the kid might want to shift gears into pleasing you or helping you. And I'm not saying that kids can't know you struggle. Of course, kids will know at times when we struggle, but that is one of those things we do try our best to shield our kids from, because kids are very often, children are very aware of the adult, their parents' mood, and they may, especially if you have little people pleaser children, they might really want to help you and support you to the point where they don't properly process their own stuff. So you just want to be aware of that. Like even if I'm very unhappy and I'm very sad or whatever, I'm going to try my hardest to be strong, because there's a time and a place to express my true feelings and my true thoughts about certain things. So it's really just as best as you can, pull it together, right? If you mess up, no judgment, just try to fix it, right? So let's see, I had made some notes for myself. Let me see if I covered everything I wanted to cover. Timing, setting, talked about that. Okay, so I kind of touched on this, but I want to talk a little bit about approaches and techniques. So when our kids are expressing their reaction to whatever we're saying, again, they might be angry, mad, sad, hurt, blah, blah, blah. So we want to validate their feelings, right? Hey, I know this is really upsetting. I'm so sorry. I know this sucks. I wish it could be different, whatever. So we validate, but you also listen, right? Listen, just let them talk. You might have zero good things to say, and your kid might just need to cry and sob and grieve or be angry. And all you're doing is just listening. and you can look at them and be like, I know, I'm sorry, I know. And that's it. That's all you might be able to say while they're going on their whole thing, right? Open-ended questions are good. So let's shift back to a hard conversation like the sex talk or something like that, right? Um, yeah, that one's probably not going to be as much you having to listen and validate as it's going to be about how do you open that conversation? How do you continue that conversation, right? It might be, we really want to be good at open-ended questions. Like, okay, like if a kid asks, what is this? You're like, okay, where did you hear that? What do you think it means? What did your friend who told you about it say it means? And then we kind of open-ended. It's not like, well, don't you know that's a bad word? No, we're not saying that. We're going to say, do you think that's a good word or a bad word? Did you hear if it's a good word or a bad word? Like, what do you think it is, right? So we're going to do our best to ask open-ended questions because we want them to tell us before we launch into an explanation of something. We want them to tell us what they know because I want to know how much like damage control I need to do. If you're coming into this conversation, if the kid's coming in a blank slate, hey, I heard this word, have no idea what it means. What does it mean? Okay, then now I might say, okay, well, I don't want to give this kid the entire description or definition of it because they're too young. So let me just give a really small age-appropriate explanation, knowing that I will come back to this conversation later. But if they come and they're like, I heard that this means this, then you're like, that is not correct at all. And it's actually going to be something that if I don't course correct and this kid goes and says it to someone else, like I could have a big problem on my hands, or they could put themselves in danger somehow. So that's where I like, okay, well, I'm having to go into more explanation than I initially would have liked to, but I have to, right? So we're explaining, we're keeping it as simple as possible, right? We don't want to go into like all the gory details of things because that's not necessary, right? I can explain to you something in depth without being incredibly detailed, right? There's a difference between the two. And then when they're uncomfortable, if they're like, okay, I'm uncomfortable, I don't want to talk about this anymore. Okay, let's stop. We'll come back to it another time. Don't ever force something. Don't ever push it. You might be the one bringing something up because you might hear your kid repeat a joke they heard somewhere else. And you're like, no, we don't say that. And they're like, I don't even know what I said. So then you go into like, well, if you don't know what it means, don't say it. But here's what you said. And we're going to talk about this. But let me explain to you what it means and let's explain why you're not allowed to say that. It's a very rude word. It's disrespectful. It's whatever. So you have to be able to, and I mean, there are times where I'm not proud of it, where, if I heard my kid say something, I'm like, dude, where'd you hear that? That's terrible. And I probably could have handled that more calmly and been like, Tristan, that's actually not a nice word. Where'd you hear that, right? But like, I'm also human and I'm entitled to react. And if it catches me off guard, it catches me off guard. So then you go back and you fix it. So there have been times where I'm like, sorry, should not have reacted that way. I just was kind of shocked. So I reacted, but I'm sorry. Here's what, let's talk about it, right? So always as a parent, always being able to apologize when we mess something up and fix it. Right? So having, the open-ended, the listening, all of that, but then always when the conversation is over, check back in after a little while, whether it's later that day, the next day, come back to it and be like, hey, conversation we had the other day, do you have any questions? Has anything come up? Because they're going to take all the information you gave them and they're probably going to mull it over and they're going to roll it around their mind. And at some point there could be follow-ups that they have, follow-up questions. So being able to come back to it and be like, so do you have any more questions? Is there anything else you wanted to ask me about that? And then always having rules around something. So like there are conversations that we've had where I'm like, hey, this isn't something you go and you explain to your friends. If your friends want to know about this, they can ask their own parents. You're not going to be the one that's going to explain this. You're not the one that's going to be teaching people about it. That's a private conversation that you and I are having. They can ask their own parents. And if they ask you about it, just be like, you should probably ask your mom about that. Like, no. And obviously as he gets older, that's not cool. So he's going to have to navigate that. But we make it pretty clear in our home, these are conversations you can have with your friends, and these are conversations you should be careful to not have. But again, as they get older, these kids, especially boys, are probably going to talk about all kinds of things we wish they wouldn't. But I would rather we have the first, or as soon as possible, a version of that conversation that explains things that align with our values and our morals and our beliefs, so that they're not, adopting someone else's belief system that may clash with how we're raising him. Let's see. Yeah, I'm going to wrap it up here because we're already getting into this. And then I will have Tristan on with part 2, where I want him to give us some advice about, from a kid's perspective, what are the ways that, again, because kids see through a lot of what we do, right? I want him to be able to tell us some of his experiences of having to have hard conversations, if he's comfortable sharing that, and then also advice, because he's really good at that. So remember, it's okay to feel nervous. It's okay to be uncomfortable or unsure about how to have a hard conversation with your kid, but you simultaneously want to take care of yourself and parent and do all the things that you have to do. But it's always good to get support, to get resources. Quick Google search can answer a lot of questions, and now ChatGPT. And then you can always reach out to me and just be like, hey, what do I do? My kid asked me this, give me some help, right? So I'm always here. Okay, I'm gonna wrap this up. And I also, fun thing I wanna tell you, and I will make kind of a more dedicated video to this, but I recently got trained, I got a certification with this company called GoZen, and it does a lot of parent education and even work with kids about lots of different things. And one of the workshops that I'm actually going to be hosting soon online is all about resilience in children, how to teach children to be resilient to a lot of the things that they go through in life, whether it's bullying or insecurities, confidence issues, all kinds of stuff like that. So I'm working on that behind the scenes. I'm really excited about it. It's a curriculum that's created by someone else, and I've just learned to teach this. So really excited about it. So stay tuned for that. And then stay tuned for part 2 of this with Tristan next week. All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.